TPR.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the TPR Pod. Today's episode is with a returning esteemed guest, Aanchal Malhotra. Aanchal Malhotra is an author. She's written her second book. That is precisely what we're talking about. It follows on from her first book, which was about the 1947 and subsequent 71 partitions in South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. The first book was called Remnants of a Separation. Some other territories have different names, but in that she was talking to people who had survived the partition or their descendants, and the thematic element was how they had carried with them these objects across borders, across hardships, and the stories held within those objects, and the memories that they retained, that material memory sort of thing. And of course, there's a whole oral history umbrella that Aanchal Malhotra is so involved in. This second book is called In the Language of Remembering. I've got it right here. This is not limited as much to objects or to people who have survived the partition. This is those people included, yes, but their descendants, their grandchildren, perhaps even their great grandchildren. It talks about how the stories of the partition and the stories of the people who survived those times, stories of hope, fear, violence, happiness, struggle, strife, identity, all of that, how that has translated through generations, through storytelling, through conversation. Again, tying into that oral history angle that she's so deeply involved in. This is perhaps the first of at least two, perhaps more episodes, because I had only read a third of the book, as I mentioned in the episode. So we talk about what I'd read, and there's a lot of conversations just around that one bit. It's a great book. I recommend you all go and buy it. And yeah, Aanchal is always great to talk to. The conversation always feels very authentic, it feels very sincere, and it feels very grounded. And this one's no different. So without further ado, let's jump right into pod number 166 with Aanchal Malhotra.
Hey, so about your book, you wrote the book after how many years after Remnants did you start writing this?
Well, the research for it started alongside Remnant. So around 2013, 2014, I think the first interview where I saw something like intergenerational memory emerging was in Lahore in September 2014.
Right. Okay.
और तब उसके बाद I started actually paying quite a lot of attention to how many generations were present in an interview. So the research continued since 2014 to now, and I think I started seriously writing, putting together, collating things in early 2020 maybe.
Okay.
And the book finally was published in 2022.
Okay, it got delayed. I think you mentioned to me that it was delayed because of COVID. So you started writing in early 2020. When was it supposed to come out?
2021.
Okay.
Later in the year. And then it eventually ended up coming out early 2022.
So it wasn't super delayed. By a few months, perhaps?
By a few months, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you are not somebody... So I think Remnants was your first book. And I think before that, you were not somebody who would call themselves a writer, right? Nor an interviewer, right? Because through this little song and dance show that I've got going, it's very different talking to people about a subject, right? People, especially who you don't know. And often, you have Chalo with me, it's a podcast, so they're doing something and we're going to talk about something that they're doing. You're talking to people about one amorphous topic, but generally one thing, the partition of India. But the people vary wildly, like, who they are, what their circumstances was, their age, demographic, everything. So you found in Remnants a sort of anchor, which was the objects, right? Do you think you're better? How was it difficult talking to people and finding a through line? Because you're not, again, talking to people as small talk. There is a purpose. This will become a book, right? So you, a person who is not a writer with several, this is like your first project, you have the objective that I'm going to talk to this person I do not know about a subject that I don't know how they'll react to, and then I have to filter that through my mind and put it into words that somebody will perhaps find engaging. How did that process vary from Remnants, your first book, to this, your second book, which is also like sort of like a sequel to Remnants? How did that vary for you?
Well, so I think always interviewing people is complicated. It's always complicated. Sometimes when you know the subject matter is something heavy like partition, it makes it even more complicated because you're wondering how to navigate that conversation always. Though I have to say that it's also an underlying thread. So you have that in common. And sometimes when you have this thing in common, there are aspects or emotions that perhaps don't need to be said out loud, they can be felt. Right? So in that sense, talking about partition is both easy and hard because of the shared history that already exists. That being said, I think speaking to strangers actually may be a little easier than speaking to your family because you don't have that burden of family history. You don't have that, when you confess history, when you exhume history, you extract it, relationships change. Sometimes for worse, sometimes for better. You change the way that you love someone when you realize the history that you've inherited. I think with this book, In the Language of Remembering, because I was speaking to younger people, I thought it was going to be a lot easier. But in fact, I found it a lot harder than Remnants. A lot harder than Remnants because people were younger and because they were my age or along the same generation that I was. And I had not expected the conversations to be as visceral. When you're speaking to survivors, you have this distinct understanding that the past is very much the past and what we are speaking about has already happened and is confined to the past.
Right.
But when you're speaking to descendants and this past somehow has found a way to permeate into the present, it's found a way to continue on, not as obviously or evidently as something physical. It's not a physical wound. It's something very, it's something maybe buried inside or some sort of like, I don't know, mental thing that carries on. It's a kind of invisible inheritance is what I'm trying to say. And when you speak to younger people and they talk about partition and how they are trying to work through it, they are trying to not emulate the feelings of their ancestors because that's impossible. They can't feel the same pain or the same loss or the same anger even. But they're trying to create new relationships and situate their identity within this event that kind of changed borders and nationalities, and so I think what I wasn't expecting is the kind of visceral, vulnerable conversations that I received. And I did not expect to become so entangled in them. I did not expect to feel that the book is so autobiographical because it is. And because I think sometimes people can say things that you have been trying to find the words to say.
Yeah.
Right? And so I notice this with a lot of my conversations. Maybe I'm going a little maybe I'm moving too far ahead in the conversation, but I did feel that a lot of things that I was thinking about but didn't have words for.
Yeah.
Didn't even know if that was for sure something that I felt it found utterance in other people's interviews.
Right.
So I didn't, I guess, making a very long and convoluted answer to your question, I didn't expect the interviews to be as intimate or urgent as they became.
Were you, this perhaps might be more revealing about me than you, were you concerned about your ability to put those feelings, truly reflect those in the book?
Of course. I mean, of course, that's a very natural thing. Like, can I do justice to this incredibly intimate detail that someone has shared?
Yeah.
Because I think you have an innate responsibility to tell the story the way it has been told to you, even if sometimes you may not agree with how it's being told.
Yeah.
And you have to realize very early, and I realized this with remnants also, that it's really not about me. It is about the story, about the interviewee, about the words that they have used, about the vocabulary they have chosen to tell their story in. And I had this innate responsibility to do justice to that. So I think how I gauge whether I have done a good job or not is by sharing the interview with my interview always. So we record, I transcribe, I write it out. And in writing out, you have a lot of your own insights that you offer. Not in like, this is what I thought, but by gathering secondary research also, right? And sometimes things are clearer to you as someone who is removed from the story than to the interviewee themselves. And so I would write things out and send it to people, and then we would have a conversation about it. Sometimes it would be exactly what they had in mind. Other times, not so much. Sometimes, of course, sometimes there are things that you as an interviewer may have misheard, misunderstood, completely misrepresented because of your background. And I think that conversation is very important. It's a very ethical way of doing research as well, where you invite the interviewer into the writing process as well. And only when we had only when both them and me were completely happy with the product that we had, did it go into the manuscript.
Also, what I was noticing, because I was...
Sorry to interrupt you, but also some interviews were conducted years before they were written.
Right, yes.
So in those years, people's understanding of their own history may have also changed. Or they may have discovered new things. So I think that this conversation at the end, right before things were put in a manuscript, was really integral to the process.
Yeah. Nick, I was looking at this is also evident in the book, because there are conversations where people's context of their own history is changing in like real time. Like as they're talking to you, like there's the story about the Sial people who ended up being somewhere in Pakistan, but unko pata hi nahi tha where they were from, and they had no information about their history, and then you share something from a history of like Punjab or something, and they're realizing, oh, this is us, and then there are questions about where are we from, do we even belong anywhere. That is updating in real time, which is like a crazy thing to happen for somebody whose context about their existence is changing in an interview where somebody is asking about their feelings about the partition. Lekin another thing before we get to that story was also because I'm interested in the process, you add a lot of because it's just, you can't just transcribe what people are saying and then expect that to be interesting and convey the thing also, because not everyone's a seasoned orator or something who can put all the perfect words in. People don't know at times what they feel, so then you're putting in, they're looking a certain direction, their breathing changes, their tone changes, all of those small observations. Was that something you have a history now? I'm like, how did she know to do this, right?
I think if you read Remnants in comparison to this, you're gonna find it there as well. And I think that is because just of my education as an artist. That's really you rely so much on visual memory, visual stimulus, just generally the visual when you create any form of fine art. I think it was literally inherent in me, to notice the small things. But I think also because I think talking about memory is not talking about memory, talking about personal history, narration, anything. I don't only think that it's verbal.
Right.
it can't possibly be, because there, as you said, there are literally things that we can't put into words, and we recede because we don't know how to put them into verbal language. And sometimes when talking about trauma particularly, there is no verbal language. We
Right.
don't have a
Yeah.
language of trauma. That's just something I realized quite early on, that for countries that are literally born from trauma, we are not given the adequate language to talk about what happened. So even when we start conversations with our grandparents, we are like, I saw this with myself. What do I ask? How can I ask? Can I use the word Pakistan? Can I say that Pakistan was once their home? There is like a hesitation to even think about the vocabulary you're putting together, because you don't know. You don't know the threshold of your questioning yet. And we realize that threshold with each interview, because each interviewee is different. But I think that I realized quite early on that conversations cannot only be verbal. They have to be gestural. They have to be contingent on movement. They have to be contingent on tone and pitch and how people change when they talk about certain things. And I just thought that was as important to record as what they said.
Yeah.
Oral history is not only about what is said, but what is unsaid. It's so much about gesture and movement. And I think early on, one of my interviews in the book also says that memory resides in the body. And it was so apparent.
Yeah.
How people react. How they react to their own story. I wanted to record those things as well. So I think that was kind of like its habit. I don't know if I can really stop. I think it also helps the reader to actually visualize.
No, it really does. Yeah. I remember, like a simplistic analogy would be like, when somebody's talking about a past event in a movie and then you begin a flashback, right? So if they just say what happened, that narration without the flashback visual, it won't have that sort of context and impact, etc. And that's what happens to me, because I think in my mind I've had, like, from childhood, this insane imagination where everything becomes a visual, to the point where, like, it's not even something I think about. Okay, what would it be like? So that's what was happening here.
I think it's the same for me. Like, it comes very naturally. I don't think about it automatically. Like in my notebook, of course, I have an audio recording everything. I don't really use video, but in my notebook, I very much write down like silence from this timestamp to this timestamp, or the light. I remember this one interview I did with someone in Canada once, where it was a couple of years ago over video call, and he spoke to me when dawn hadn't even happened in the day. Like the day was very, very early, and it was totally dark. And as he began talking over the course of 1 hour, 2 hours, light began pouring in. And eventually it illuminated this beautiful Fulkari tapestry he had behind him. So it went from dark to this like brilliant golden.
Wow.
And I put it in the book because it needed to be there, because I felt other people needed to know this beautiful, like, illuminating scene that I had witnessed.
Is it easy to talk about? See, the thing is, another problem is you're not a removed party, right? You're not somebody who's coming from a different culture, history, perspective, looking at this as research, or even trying to find an interesting story. You yourself are a descendant of people who moved over at the time of the partition. So do you have to consciously, is there a decision, I expect there's not one decision to be made, that do I put my own context into the story, do I remove my context because it might not match with what the person is saying? Do you find yourself consciously thinking about that as you're putting the interview together?
You're right, it varies person to person. Sometimes it is actually just about learning about something even I would not have known about.
Right.
But I think because maybe that interview is so geographically different from my history, or culturally different from my history, or situationally different from my history, I am also curious. I am also learning. I am interested. I don't even want to interrupt sometimes.
Sure.
Like there are interviews where it's just pages and pages of conversation because I'm learning alongside my reader. And I think actually that's a very good thing with a scholar, that to know that you are not like the know-all of it.
Yeah.
And I took it very much in this book as, this book is very much a learning experience for me as well. Because there were so many renditions of memorialization, so many different ways to talk about the same event. But then there are, even within those interviews and others as well, there are things sometimes what people say when you think, yes, of course, yes, this is how I feel as well. And I remember at times me saying it, but then I remember at times just writing it down.
Yeah.
Not wanting, like there was, I remember distinctly an interview where a scholar from Lahore is doing her PhD on Lucknow. And she says to me that most people ask me two things. One, why are you doing work on an Indian city when you are Pakistani? Hence, why are you doing work on Lucknow and not say Lahore?
Yeah.
And the second thing, don't you think you should go to Lucknow once to see what it's like? Because she had never been. And she says something very important. She says that it's not essential for me to go to see what it's like now. My work is on the nostalgia that people have carried, like the Lucknow that they carried with them, the Lucknow that lives in their heart, in their dreams, in their histories. That is the Lucknow I am interested in. So it is not so important for me to go and see what it's like, because I'm interested in the memory of that place unfractured by time. And I remember thinking, yes, I can relate to this. I understand this. And I never said it to her at the time, but in the book, it's like, okay, this I understand.
How can you relate to this? What is your personal story here?
I mean, like I've been to Lahore, and my Nana and Nani are both from Lahore. And of all four of my grandparents' birthplaces, they were born in Dera Ismail Khan, Malakwal, and Lahore. Nana, Nani both from Lahore, Dada, Dadi from different places. Lahore was most accessible to me.
Sure.
I went there and I had heard stories of what their house was like in Shahalmi and Chudamandi, and what a syncretic life they had lived, how incredible Anarkali Bazaar was. And sometimes when you go there, things don't match.
Yeah, of course.
No, the imagined landscape is filtered through lenses of nostalgia and magic.
Yeah.
Reality of a completely different era of now just doesn't add up to it.
Yeah.
And I don't regret going. I don't regret going because literally being there would prevent future regrets from happening from future generations. But I just remember, the thing is, I went armed with the knowledge that the house wouldn't be there, because I knew that in Shahalmi in June 1947, there was a very big fire that basically ravaged the entire neighborhood and reduced it to like embers, flames.
Sure.
So I knew that the house wouldn't be there, but still, like my belief in memory, where I was going and I was looking for every 4-story house with the kind of features that my Nani's sister had told me about, with the kind of, they were like, yahan paas mein pani wala talab hoga, or ye, machi hatta bazaar hoga, and this and that. And I was looking for those things that didn't exist. And I obviously didn't find them because they didn't exist.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is people that are, you make rounds and you make another round, and you make different rounds, and people see you walking, and then I think there's something on your face that says you're looking for something. And wo log jo baithe the, they asked after like 2 or 3 hours, kya aap Bharat se aaye hain?
Yeah.
Aap apna ghar dhoond rahe hain? And us moment mein ye word jo ghar hai, like, is that my home? It doesn't exist now. I don't even know what it looks like. I can't tell you where it is. I don't have any, I have no trace of it. But it felt like home, like being in that place felt like it was mine. Those people felt like they were mine. I felt like these would have been the people my grandparents would have sat and had chai with, or, had they been still. So I think that I related to what she said, because I do carry like a memory of a place that has been passed down. it's a second-hand memory of a place. It doesn't belong to me. I'm telling a story of a story that was told to me.
Yeah.
So there is so much removal, and yet there is so much connection. And I understood when she said that the imagined landscape is far deeper, denser, sometimes more, people hold on to it more. Because that's how they want to remember it sometimes. Several people in this book have asked their grandparents, would you like to go back? Or parents. And some people say yes. And some people say no.
Yeah.
And the people say no because quite often they know the image that they have preserved in their mind for decades may not match up.
Yeah.
The reality of what things look like now.
Yeah, this is a common thing with much less, I suppose, well, maybe not necessarily much less, but seemingly less weight associated when people move abroad from Pakistan or India, and they have this image of, Pakistan mein to aise hota hai, and but they're living in North America, for example, and that what I feel in this would be that it just shows that your story is your story, but also time just continues, right? And you're a small part of like this huge thing. So it's like it's two things then. It's like your story and your physical hold in the story of the place that might not exist, right? Physically. But if it's important to you, then it needs to exist in you, right? You need to hold on to it, and it's still valuable, even if it's not like Aanchal ko apna ghar nahi mila. Yeah, if I go to Delhi, which is my huge paranoia, if I show up to Delhi, I don't know what I'll do, how it'll happen, and whatever I think I'll find there does not exist. Phir kya hoga? And how will I feel? I'll be like, chalo, that it makes sense, but also I am disappointed that it's not there.
I don't know if I'm disappointed. Like the thing is, I knew I wouldn't find anything.
You knew, yeah.
I knew.
Did you say the fire happened in June?
Yeah.
June
21st.
So before the partition.
Couple of months before, yeah, because there were a lot of curfews in Lahore, and there was rioting, and this fire has been very systematically recorded as well through oral testimony in history and archive. So I was able to, and it actually plays a very big role in my next book.
Okay.
But now you have mentioned something interesting about you coming to Delhi, and I know that this is your podcast, and I hate to put you on the spot, but I also kind of want to.
Yeah, sure.
So, full disclosure, I interviewed for everyone listening. You are in the book as well.
Yeah.
And very interesting things happened with your interview. Because I remember when we were first speaking from my perspective, then we can get to yours as well. From my perspective, when we started talking about it, firstly, you were so nonchalant about the whole thing. You were like, like the whole thing was, I don't know what you will find, and I don't actually have anything interesting to tell you.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think I was highly envious of how nonchalant you were.
Yeah, you mentioned.
You were so, right, and I write that in the book as well. It was like so cool. You were so cool about the whole thing.
Yeah.
You were like, whatever, it is what it is. And I remember thinking, God, I wish I was that like passé about my history, because I think I just take I think firstly I take myself too seriously, but also like any evidence I have of my past, I take very seriously. So it was very refreshing to see someone who genuinely was like so nonchalant about the whole thing. But then there was a discernible shift in our conversation. And I think that shift happened when you began speaking about how for people who have come from Hindustan, there is no like native place for them.
Yeah.
And this is a sentiment that so many people echo throughout the book, not just Pakistanis, but Indians and also people who now live in Bangladesh that carry multiple migrations in their family. That my native place, my village is inaccessible to me. And I think when you said that, something in you changed. And then you talked about your mother who visited Delhi. and you saw a photograph of her in the 80s, and you were very surprised that she was in Delhi in the 80s when it was like,
Yeah.
you
Zeola.
know, right.
Yeah.
And then you said, I couldn't believe that she had gone, and there was an evidence of her being there because you knew that you may not be able to go ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the conversations we've had since then, I see that you are more and more interested in family history.
Yeah, it's also weird because my family history, like, I mean, the nonchalance thing is something I've worked very hard on over many years.
To construct it or to deep, like to like.
I think it is not constructed, but it is also something that I realize is perhaps not ideal for all situations in life, and people can sometimes find unnerving because it is in everything, right? Like yeah, with me, like it's very hard. uh Apart from things I'm interested in, to chalo, I'm interested in stuff and I'm enthusiastic and whatever. But in like real life serious situations, or work or whatever, it's very hard for people to gauge if I am stressed or concerned or whatever, or something similar to that. And I don't think that is something I'm consciously doing. And then at times I feel like, yeah, I'm not even concerned about anything, and aisa to nahi hona chahiye. So it's like a mix of several things. What happened with the thing was, okay, then you asked later on for the picture. Okay, भाई तुम कह रहे हो picture है तो भेज दो. What is going to happen with that, by the way? Because I did eventually somehow find it. Is that going somewhere, or did
No,
it seem real?
I'm still working on it. I create a reading guide for my books to help people literally visualize what they're reading about.
Sure.
But whereas I have a lot of control when it came to remnants for taking photographs of objects and stuff like that, in this case you have to rely on people sending you photographs.
Yeah.
And then our photographs of objects, the photographs of people. So it takes a very long time to just collate all that.
Okay.
Apologies on that.
No, that's fine. Kuch na bhi ho, though it's fine. So there is this picture, and now I'm mobilizing my family, who is.
But I think you should give a bit of context.
The picture is. I mentioned that there's a picture of my mother, her brothers, and my khala in India, apparently in Delhi, and piche there's a darwaza. I have no idea. Yeah, is this even Delhi? Is this a darwaza? They're saying this is all of this, and then it is. It was.
It was a darwaza. I went to work because I worked in the Red Fort for about a year and a half, and it was the door I put every day. It's called the Delhi Gate of Red Fort.
So, the thing is, until a story becomes real, it's a story, right? हाँ जी, तुम्हारे तो ancestors, नानी के घर वाले तो सब मुगल थे, and I'm like, हाँ bro, सब वहाँ पाकिस्तान में आधे लोग जो थे, they're all descended from Mughals, and अगर इंडिया होता तो हम, there's this greater, Muslim subcontinental story कि भाई we were the kings, और फिर हमारे साथ धोखा हो गया, and it's sort of, I feel like people use it to rationalize their difficulties in life at the moment by sort of thinking of when things were better. And it doesn't necessarily have to be super accurate that you were part of that better story, but it's like, it helps people feel better about this. So my job is, I'm an auditor, so I can't not investigate things from this sort of cynical perspective. Fair. So मैंने कहा अच्छा ठीक है, हाँ इनकी भी कोई होगी story. Now at some point it would, my nani, when she was alive, this story would start becoming a bit more real. Because as a child, I'm like, okay, Mughals, Babur, Humayun, whatever. And then my nani and her brothers, for me, it was a story. Then it was like some old lady outside the Taj Mahal. It's very poor. I think she lived on the street or something. एकदम से ना न्यूज़ में आ गई. उस ज़माने में दूरदर्शन was in Pakistan also. कि हाँ, I'm descended from बहादुर शाह जफर, and ये ताजमहल तो हमारा होना चाहिए था, और इंडियन गवर्नमेंट को हमें दे देना चाहिए, और न्यूज़ में आ गया. It's a whatever. It's a story. इतनी नानी को आग लगी कि ये समझते हैं ये इनका है, and I'm like, what? नहीं, हमारे यहाँ ये तो जब पाकिस्तान बना था तो there was every other day some descendant of the Mughals would show up, and then my eldest brother would hold a press conference. I'm like, what? There would be a press conference where the family tree would be displayed. I'm like, why is my family the only people who are talking about this? Because now it's like, oh, you are really descended from Mughals, and now jitna hame apni fabled history ka interest hai, other people should know this as well. Khair, guzar gayi baat. Then time goes on, Nani passes away. There are other stories where it starts to, for me, to seem like, acha, maybe it's plausible, maybe it's not a story. Kyunki there are incidents that have happened, in the past, chori ho gayi, someone gets murdered, whatever, over what? Heirlooms. Like, there was some talwar of some noble, wo ghar se chori kar li, uski resolution mein some brother gets murdered, is tarah ki story, decades ago. I never met them before my time. फिर क्या होता है, अच्छा मुगल्स कौन थे? मुगल्स वर डिसेंडेड फ्रॉम द मंगोल्स, ये वो तैमूरी, इन सबका नाम है. तैमूर इज ऑफ Tamerlane वगैरह. One of my mamus goes with my nani to a museum in the US, and there's a Mongolian warrior, and he's like, I'm looking at that warrior's face and I'm looking at my mother's face, and they look like the same face. So now people are like, oh, there's like some genius. It's just solidifying. Whatever, chalo theek hai. I tell Aanchal Malhotra my story, and then she's like, picture le aao. Acha, picture aati hai. Picture, again, a huge problem to get this picture, because the picture was in Pakistan. Nobody was in Pakistan at the time to acquire this picture. Ghar wale come back, which is why it took me so long to give it to you. My mother comes back from Canada, tasveer scan hoti hai, gets sent. Acha, theek hai. The door is recognized, okay, it is a place. Then you ask this very different question, where अच्छा वो गए थे India. I don't know if you asked it or it came from my side. Okay, who did they stay with? And
You only offered and then asked.
अच्छा. So because when I was telling you the story in my overly cool way, you said, no, there are people who have been documented.
Yes, I said it, and then I found evidence in a book.
Yeah. So you said that there are people who have been documented to very likely be actual descendants. So it's not like there can be no descendants, right? Because my idea was कि ये तो सब कहते हैं, because everyone wants to be a Mughal, because that's a fantasy story of our region. So अच्छा. Then it turns out that the people whose name you find turn out to be the people, the same Khatun who my mother, her brothers and my nanny, who they went to their house to stay at. So then it starts to become a bit more real. I've forgotten her name, but there is a copy of because she appeared in the National Geographic as well. I think based off the same William Dalrymple story, Tahira Begum or something. I don't know. That's what the name seems like. So that was this unusual.
Her name is Qamar Sultan.
Qamar Sultan. So, sure. Who's Tahira Begum? I have no idea. Yeah, so this was this weird journey where we went on, where a family story of mine, this is something you do. In other interviews, people have these stories, and because you are a real person researching this stuff, you have the facts. And often the people don't have the facts, and you somehow don't have the stories, and this conversation becomes the bridge where what could just be a family fable is connected to ye to hua tha, and this person was real, and
Yes,
then that story changes.
Absolutely, and I think it gives a bit of validation to the family also.
Sure.
I think there's something very important about creating an archive of common people, where you know that the story has been recorded both orally and with secondary research for posterity. Because for so long, we just didn't record stories. And then by we, I just don't mean Indians, I mean Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, we didn't write anything down. Our stories are oral.
Yeah.
इसने ये कहा था, उसने वो कहा था, ये तब हुआ था.
Yeah.
But we don't have any records. I remember a couple of years ago getting into this weird conversation with this lady from the UK who wrote to me with a photograph of a sari. Have we talked about this ever?
I don't know.
Okay, well,
Batao.
anyway, she had this sari that had like a stamp of Bombay in 1944,
Hmm.
and she wanted me to find out if I knew what company the sari had been bought from. It was like a particular stamp, and I looked for it and I helped her and all. But in that conversation, she shared all of these letters that her grandfather had written, documenting literally him coming to India as a soldier to fight.
Yes,
You know,
yeah, you mentioned this.
and she was like, I'm so surprised that a common person, he kept all these records. I'm sure your grandparents would have as well. And I was like, well, no. Like there's nothing, there's nothing, because most people weren't even educated enough to keep records, and they didn't think of that. Here, your grandfather was on this incredible journey that he was taking, and he was documenting it for you, but it wasn't really the same for the colonized.
Oh, she was not of. She was not Desi. She was not.
She was British.
Okay.
She was British.
Okay.
So, it just dawned on me that we don't write anything down. We don't record anything, and it's something that's emerged as a rule for that I always think that I need to write for the future. So I need to record things about my past, about my present, that I think will help my future. Because no one wrote things down for me. It's so hard to do. It's so hard to write the history of common people when you have nothing before you.
Yeah. History, एक ये भी है ना कि there is a lot of written history about India, Pakistan, वगैरह, but none of it is about normal people.
No, it doesn't concern common people. It concerns like the corridors and capitals of the empire.
Yeah.
Something like and I realized this quite directly when we were having that conversation, her and me, because at the time I was writing a history of my grandfather's great grandfather, I think, who in the late 1800s had been a police officer.
Right.
And specifically, he'd been put on plague duty in like 1897 or something. And, I found the exact thana that he was a part of. But even though I knew his rank, even though I knew where he was from, even though I knew his father's name, his name wasn't in the record. Like I have his certificates, I have his everything. I have.
Was it like a clerical omission, do you think, or janke?
No, because there were no like brown people in that. And so the conversation was like, even though my ancestor was someone, and I have a record of that, he wasn't there in the archive. Like your grandfather would have so easily been.
Just because of who he was.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I wasn't looking hard enough. Maybe he is there, but I was very excited to find this document, and very disappointed to see that he wasn't in it, even though I had his certificates in my hand.
Okay, one thing, because all the people you're talking to are, well, not all the people you're talking to, I haven't gone through the whole thing, but many of the people you're talking to are those affected by the partition, in the sense that they had to move from where their family was to somewhere else, whether khud se, whether majboori se, and you are talking to their descendants. Is this the thing, I was mentioning that the Hindustani Muhajir people in Pakistan, they might have this sense that, hum to India se aaye hain and whatever. It's both. It's there's a sense of entitlement that we're amazing because we came here from India to make Pakistan. But also there's the sense of injustice that humne to ye kiya tha, and we don't have this, and India. Khair. Are people, but then there's all the people who were Punjabi and they stayed in Punjab, and they just didn't have to move. And the partition was a thing that happened around them, but not perhaps as much to them. Is there? I haven't spoken to anybody I know about this, but in your experience, is the partition really an important event more so to the people who it happened to, or is it like bigger than that? Like, is it only us who really care about the partition?
Maybe if you would have asked me this question a couple of years ago, I would have said no. But I don't think it's the case. I think for many, in this book, there are people who haven't been impacted by partition. They've only heard of memories. And if something that happened 75 years ago can play such an important role in their life today, then it obviously tells you that you don't have to be directly impacted by something to feel intimately about it. Okay. Similarly, even if you didn't have to migrate at the time of partition, but everyone around you was, and you maybe helped people migrate, yes, or you sheltered people, or you cooked in a camp, or you worked in a camp, or maybe you perpetrated the violence.
Sure. Yeah.
I think there are many ways to be connected to partition without actively migrating back and forth. And that memory can also live on in psyche and be passed down. Like there are several stories where I'll give you an example. For instance, someone said that my grandmother's friend who had to migrate during partition, my grandmother missed her so much, so she named me after her.
Yes.
Something like that. Like it's not a direct memory, but it's a direct legacy.
Sure. In India, do you think it's like primarily, though? I don't know. Was South India affected much by the partition in terms of people coming in?
No, not as much. Like I would say, there was an exodus from people of Hyderabad state post 48, particularly when it was annexed to India. And there are some migrations that have taken place from, say, Kerala to Dera Ismail Khan of merchants who worked. I reported this on story many years ago. There were some migrations from Vizag or Visakhapatnam to Karachi, but it was not in the same numbers that it was in the north. They may have been isolated, like many Sindhis, Hindu and Sikh Sindhis were relocated to parts of Bangalore at one point. Not directly, but ultimately. But I don't think, I think the most prominent memory in South India is during World War II, when a warship came very close to Madras. I think it actually bombed Madras.
Yeah, because we have Goan Christians,
right? Absolutely,
in Karachi.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, Goan Christians. That's another really big community. Yes.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that it's not. I suppose you would assume, I think also because they are Christian, it is harder to just assimilate into Pakistani society as much and lose your identifying factors. Where, like if you go to Lahore, you just become Lahori eventually, like 2 generations baad. But I think Karachi mein na, because this now that I think of it makes sense, because it is so multicultural, people hold on to their cultures like really zor se. And there's no like overarching Karachi identity that you can just merge into. That overarching Karachi identity is that there are so many cultures. So the Goan Christians speak exactly
like... It reminds me very much of Bombay.
Acha.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the Goan Christian descendants, the only reason I know that they're Goan is because they speak exactly like the people from Goa who I've met either in the UAE or seen in Bollywood movies. I was like, oh, this is like exactly, the way those people speak. So they must be, and then you hear, wo to the waki. And I'm like, it's amazing that like 3 generations down, you haven't lost, that specific places like vibe.
The same for Parsis also. I find Parsis in Pakistan. They very much hold on. They're very proponents of their culture.
Might also be a minority thing. That when you know that, you're not the majority, and if you don't do your thing, it's going to go away. Maybe you hold on.
Very generalizing.
Yeah.
I'm very generalizing always, because there are many instances where assimilation is, because for us, whether you're Hindu or Muslim, sometimes it's difficult to tell, right? My shapat pe to likha nahi hai. So sometimes to assimilate is not so hard, and sometimes you want that invisibility, particularly if you are a minority.
Yeah, no, of course, that makes sense. But like, agar aapke, if you're not actively or passively being like, persecuted, and you're just like,
Hmm.
but you're not also growing at a rate where you know that your identity
Hmm.
can be sustained. I think Parsis, I mean, obviously, I don't want to speak for them, but I haven't heard a lot of like anti-Parsi sentiment as much as I might have heard, like, in Pakistan, like
Anti-
anti-Shia, anti-Sindhi, whatever,
Yeah.
everything. Huh.
There was one book that I was reading while researching this. It's partly written by Asif Nunani Saab, who is a reviewer for Dawn newspaper, and Kuldeep Nayak, who used to be a very senior journalist until a few years ago when he passed in India. And in Nunani Saab's section of that book, they were talking about being born in Bombay and Sialkot, respectively. And Nurani Saab is born in Bombay. And a couple of years after partition, him and his family moved to first to Lahore, then to Karachi, and which is where he lives now. And now, by this weird turn of events, he chooses to come to visit his grandfather, his Nana, who still lives in Bombay, in 1965. And when he's here, the 1965 war happened.
Achha. Yeah.
And they, and he says in the book, like, there were already tensions when I boarded the ship, but I thought कि ऐसा कुछ नहीं होगा, चलो चलते हैं.
Yeah.
So he comes in India and he basically is stranded in Bombay for like 2 or 3 months. And it's an interesting thing to realize that he is now the other in the city that he was born.
Yeah.
So there is an incident that he narrates about someone has asked for some eye drops in Pakistan from a very specific pharmacy in Bombay. So he goes to that pharmacy. उन्होंने कहा हुआ है कि ये आएंगे हमारे eye drops लेने के लिए. So Nurani Saab goes to that pharmacy and he's like, I'm looking for so and so person to give me these eye drops for so and so person in Karachi. And so the pharmacist is like, you're Pakistani. And Nurani Saab is like, no, I'm from Karachi. Because he says that, like, Karachi and Bombay were not at war. India and Pakistan were at war. And I found that like a sweet thing. But the other thing he mentions is that he was on a bus once coming back from a movie, from a movie theater, and there was air raids ho rahe the. And at the time, they would do something called brownout, where they would take brown paper and put it on the lights of the buses.
Achha. Yeah.
Bomb गिर रहा है या कोई एयर रेड हो रहा है तो पता नहीं चलना चाहिए कि लाइट कहाँ से आ रही है, something like that.
Right. No, I think it's so that you don't see it from the air, but the people on ground can see के पास आ रही है.
Right. It was a similar reason why the Taj and the Victoria Memorial were like covered in black, so that it wouldn't shine. So now he's sitting in his bus and these two Parsi men are having a conversation in the seat in front or behind him, close to him, and he listens in on their conversation. And one of the guys is like, listen, if a Pakistani bomb falls on a house, he won't know whether the house is of a Parsi or a house of a Hindu. I don't know why we are in the middle of these Indians and Pakistanis, of these Hindus and Muslims, which I thought was like really funny because it's true.
Yeah.
Right? The other one goes, you're so right. I'm thinking of moving to England. Because he's right. He's like, if a bomb falls, he's not going to be able to tell whether this is a Hindu house or it's a Muslim house or it's a Parsi house.
Yeah.
So what are we doing in the middle here? And I thought that was such an interesting anecdote. The book is called Tales of Two Cities, not a tale of two cities, tales of two, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the Parsi community is, I think, reducing in Karachi.
Yeah.
There's a guy, Bilal, also known as Mr. Paki on Instagram. He has done a while ago. He went to there's a community. When you know that a demographic of people lives in a specific community, they're not the majority, because the majority just lives everywhere. And usme there were these like really nice houses and specific sort of architecture and khali, because the people had left, maybe to England, maybe wherever. But it was really portrayed as sort of like this vanishing culture.
जब मैं Karachi गई थी in 2018, I stayed in Beach Luxury.
Okay.
Which is beautiful at the waterfront. It reminds you exactly of being in Bombay. And it is owned by a Parsi family, the Averis, who have hotels all over Pakistan, which are very much still Parsi owned.
there was a lot about, there are a few themes around the partition, which I think uh, in your book were becoming more clear to me. Okay, this is sort of like a, not really sort of, but it's quite similar to a Holocaust kind of event, but not given that sort of weightage uh, in what is the global perhaps conversation. तो एक तो ये बात हो गई कि it's not given that weightage even though devastating sort of violence was inflicted or सब कुछ. Um, but also the big difference there was that the Holocaust is supposed to be Nazis against Jews. Here it was, and some people in your story also say this, in the book also say this, there was a big idea of the British caused us to fight amongst each other. Um, and also, like, even if we remove the British sort of instigation of this, it was basically people fighting amongst each other. And that led to this huge sort of scale. And it's always, is that अब पाकिस्तान में ना, this is not the official version of events. We don't, I'll just keep it to Pakistan. पाकिस्तान में तो ये था कि obviously पाकिस्तान बनना बहुत ज़रूरी था because कायद आज़म thought कि Muslims won't have a good future and we need to have our own place. It is never, I think, because that would go against the idea of Pakistan being legitimate. It is never associated with the British caused this, right? It was Allama Iqbal had a dream. As a child, I thought he actually had a dream. And then Muhammad Ali Jinnah was against it, but then he became for it. And now here we are. Great success all around. In the Indian education system and general understanding, is the British element considered to be like part of the main story, that they instigated the partition ke jate jate we'll do this, because everyone loves to say the British love divide and conquer, the British love divide and rule. So is it historically considered valid?
अगर आप हमारी स्कूल की टेक्स्ट बुक्स में देखें तो हाँ, this is one part of it. Divide and rule does factor in for sure. Also, what factors in is Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the creator of Pakistan.
Yeah,
even
a very British person himself.
Well, yes, that is not taught to us in school. What is taught to us is that he is the reason why partition happened, and he, is the reason why India was divided and stuff like that. But this is, I want to say, a very simplistic understanding of what actually happened to a far more complicated reality.
Yeah.
Multiple viewpoints, and it really, really does depend on what kind of history you read to understand what really happened, because, jingoist state histories will tell you anything to legitimize the current national state and relationships with its neighbors. But I think it's quite important to understand it from multiple perspectives, which is also why we study partition, right? To understand the multiple viewpoints and consequences of what happened. So, yes, I think in its very, very rudimentary, simple, and sort of school textbook state, yes, both the British and Qaeda-Azam are held responsible.
Yeah, okay. Because this is...
I think the same can be said for Pakistan studies. It's very rudimentary, very simple.
That's what I'm saying. In the Indian history books, this will be seen as like a great, perhaps, betrayal or Batwara ho gaya or sab kuch, perhaps. It certainly won't be a positive event, right?
But in the last couple of years, maybe 4 or 5 years, Indian history textbooks have included more oral history.
Really?
Which never used to happen when I was in school. And that was interesting because it was taking from like popular textbooks, popular books like Urvashi Botalia's The Other Side of Silence and other oral history projects. And it was encouraging students to embark on an oral history project of their own to understand how, I suppose, to question, but also to learn of fresher perspectives in the family, or even just to delve more into family history. And then when the pandemic happened, I think this entire segment on partition was removed. because it was very traumatic for students.
Acha.
Right.
No, because the risk over there, I feel, if I was, I'm thinking from a Pakistani perspective where there's an official narrative. अगर पाकिस्तान में कोई ऐसी बात होगी, तो that will, okay, you open up oral history encouragement as part of the perhaps official curriculum. That will open up potential. The fear would be it opens up potential challenges to the official / correct narrative.
Right.
So why was this done in India?
I think because in general oral history is gaining importance
Acha.
as a legitimate source of remembrance of the past. Because there are so many oral history projects now, and it is one of the only things that can actually fill gaps.
Sure.
In official archive. It also allows for communities whose histories have been erased by official archive to be heard. So I think it was a step in the right direction.
Of course. Yeah, no, I am cynical
but
of
I
our government.
No, you're absolutely right, because I am thinking like there is also, the thing is, it's something I face a lot when doing oral history as well. Recollections of nostalgia or lament are very widely found. And where there is space in language to be found for these kind of nostalgic recollections, where there is a loss of the Edenic village or the Edenic city, and wealth is taken and people are removed to the state of being paupers, there is space in language for this. But everything else is quite difficult. To even touch on the brutality of violence or to look at something critically is quite difficult.
Yeah.
Because no story is one-dimensional. Though it may have been in a very one-dimensional way, like हम तो सब छोड़ के आ गए, हमारे पास कुछ नहीं था, हम यहाँ पे आए, started from scratch, and then we built this big empire. That's a one-dimensional narrative, but there is so much more. There is so much more nuance to these life stories where, and it's very evident when you speak to survivors that it's very hard to tell a one-dimensional narrative, because you may say, okay, they came and they burnt our houses and they looted, but then you will also say, yes, but they who were from our village helped us. The Hindu helped us, or the Muslim helped us, or the Sikh gave us space to hide in their room. So it's very complicated. Relationships at that time were very complicated, and there is a danger in homogenizing the story of partition to one narrative of displacement or violence, particularly. It's very, very dangerous. This is why you need the multiple voices. And this is why oral history comes with its own shortcomings of whether or not you can, this is a question I get a lot, can you trust what people are remembering?
Of course.
But it is its subjectivity that is its strength. The fact that it allows you so many multitudes of human narratives of partition, that is the strength of oral history, that allows people to speak for themselves in their own voices.
Yeah. Because, what is the alternative? They're not going to be in the official history books. They're not, these sort of stories aren't considered generally before this change in what you were mentioning earlier in the curriculum. Generally, all histories are told from such an extreme, high viewpoint, such a macro level. कि Churchill साहब ने ये कहा और फिर Hitler ने ये सोचा और फिर Nehru said this and then Qaid-e-Azam को TB हो गया या whatever. And there's I feel this is again something that I am forced to consider when because of my nonchalant, as it is stated, mentality. People are unable to see the wider picture, but that is not a failing of theirs, because there is so much happening in their immediate life that it is easy to feel like, how do I take a step back from all this madness that's happening in my life to consider कि नहीं ये भी हो सकता है वो भी हो सकता है. By the time you get to that stage, सब हो चुका है. Right.
Yeah, and I think it was actually impossible for people at that time to consider what was happening outside their immediate circle. They really, literally did not have the means to do it. I mean, phone nahi tha, internet nahi tha.
Yeah.
कई देर तक तो आपको पता ही नहीं चलता था कि आपके गांव के बाहर क्या हो रहा है.
Yeah.
So like to consider that people migrated great lengths without quite understanding what had happened,
What's
what
happening?
the action
Yeah.
was, why they were migrating, who was doing it, and of course how these official decisions trickle down to the common person. Like most of the people I interviewed had probably never even seen a Firang before. They had seen a sign.
Yeah. Of course, 'cause इतने थे ही नहीं. Like, there weren't as many to go
हाँ, ये
around.
सही बात है, लेकिन अपने गांव अपने शहर से आप निकले ही नहीं,
Exactly.
पता ही नहीं आपको.
Which is now, I see this on one of the many complaints we have about Pakistan on the podcast is that many Pakistanis, there is an official narrative or sab kuch hai, but many Pakistanis believe or are told to believe that bas Pakistan best hai, right? Best country in the world for various reasons, right? And you see, ek to baat, one question would be that you see all the madness around you, so how can you believe that this is the ideal state? And secondly, you've never been anywhere. So how, without this information, are you making this assertion and believing it yourself? So it's like, it's not just...
Pakistan.
No, I know.
I mean, it's unfair to say only Pakistan is like that.
But what I'm saying is कि it's not just कि उस वक्त टेक्नोलॉजी नहीं थी तो लोगों को पता नहीं था. अब तो you have every means of information, but that doesn't mean that you will necessarily look for it, and even if you find it, you will understand what it is. It's just like you can't expect people, I think, to be able to understand. This really puts us in like an amazing position कि हम बहुत intellectual हैं, इसलिए हमने ये सोच लिया. But I think because of various happenstances in our life and privileges and whatever, even we understand कि ये शायद it's not as cut and dried, right? Because the risk here is कि someone like Aanchal Malhotra or me, chalo, is like, I know exactly why the partition happened. And what I understand is the correct
just
view.
to clarify, I don't.
I know.
I don't like
Of course. Yeah. Because that's the risk that, it's not like there's no perfect solution to any of this.
Right.
And the thing where people just believe something they hear, there's a story of, I think, this Sikh person. It's just this, in this story, a Sikh person goes to a couple of Hindu boys sitting in a village, and he's like, wo dekho, wo Muslimanon ki dukaan hai, wo kitne aaram se apni cheezein bech rahe hain, and how are you guys okay with this? And the Hindu guys are like, bro, kya ho raha hai? Like, what's wrong with that? He's like, nahi, wo ye kar rahe hain idhar. And acha, the next step is we go and ransack because this guy told us that this is happening somewhere else. So obviously 100,000% Pakistan mein bhi ye ho raha hoga. What is now Pakistan? कि वो हिंदू अपनी चीजें बेच रहे हैं, how can you Muslims let this happen? No, जाके जला दिया, मार दिया, whatever. It really makes me feel bad about humanity as a whole, कि how easy is it to just tell somebody a few random trigger words and you just become like this a robot of violence that will do anything, the most heinous thing. And then going back to the Holocaust example, not everybody who joined the German army was possibly initially always knew that Jews are supposed to be bad and we are supposed to hate them. Kisi ne kaha hoga, wo maan gaye. And then they just did this insane stuff, and after it's all done, they're like, what did we do? And then you have people, unke descendants. I feel like you're not on board with all of this, but it's so weird, because if I think of me, this enlightened, educated person, I'm like, what does somebody have to say to me? कि अब I will also do this insane madness, and फिर मैं सोच रहा हूँ कि मैंने ये सही किया, What people say in your book as well, in your stories.
Right. So in that particular example that you took of the gentleman going to the young boys and saying that wahan shop mein, there, and this group of men does actually indulge in violence, and they do loot and possibly kill the owner. The reckoning doesn't happen at that moment for that person that is in the interview. The reckoning happens decades later while speaking to his grandson when he's in his 90s. And the reckoning is not also brought on solely by his memory of what has happened. The reckoning is brought on by the conversation with the grandson. And then the grandson is forced to consider whether he may also, like you, say, what does someone need to say to me for this anger to burn in me? Do I still have that gene of violence? Is violence a transferable gene? And so I think actually that interview was, it's giving me goosebumps to think about it, but it took a lot of courage to say something like that my ancestor may have been a part of the perpetrating mob. He may have done things, and I don't know what he may have done, and I'm still finding out what he may have done, but I do know that he regretted it later. And it's quite convoluted, that interview, because it's not linear. And it contradicts itself on many occasions. And the interviewee, the young man, also says, I know that this interview is contradictory because my grandfather was a complicated man. But you have to understand that things aren't remembered in a linear way. So though he may have done this, he never hated Muslims. And he never believed in the superiority of one religion over another. And a lot of those things that he says contradict the actions of his grandfather.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that sometimes, look, I don't understand. I have never spoken to a perpetrator myself.
Sure.
I have only heard stories that other people have heard either from them or of them. So it's difficult for me to make, and even if I would have spoken to a perpetrator, it would be difficult for me to make a blanket assessment of whether or not they felt absolved of their guilt, or whether they still felt guilt, or whether they felt no remorse. I can't say.
Yeah.
And there are two examples in this book where stories of perpetrators are told to me. In one case, there is some sort of reckoning of what they had done, and in another case, there is no reckoning. And it should also tell you that there's no easy way to tell an inherited story.
Yeah, of course.
And as they are telling the story, they are very conscious of the fact that they don't want you to paint them with the same color that you may be painting their ancestor.
Yeah.
There may be shades of that, but one person's crime cannot be transposed onto another's decades removed.
Of course, by association.
Right, but they are very clear of this. And where one person is quite honest, he's saying, do I also have the ability to do this? He's saying, you don't need, even a Facebook post can turn someone into rage, which is so topical. Right. But he's questioning it and he's confronting it. And I think there is something incredibly courageous in voicing that. I was very surprised to be on the receiving end of that conversation. I was really, it felt like quite a privilege to be let into something he was still figuring out on his own. And I think a lot of these conversations are like that. Like, you emerge with enormous respect for how honest people have been with you, for how much they will let you in, and how much the discovery of the past still impacts them. They very much want, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Like, at the end, all you're doing is piecing together parts of a story you have collected from various sources. Because for some people, their grandparents or parents may not have told them anything. And they may have heard snippets or names of villages and cities on the other side that are now changed. And they may not even know that. And so it's like a jigsaw in creating this intricate web of history where you have no like actual information, but you're just borrowing and you're doing research and you're looking for stories of those similar places of other people, thinking, oh, maybe my grandparents also witnessed this. I don't know. I mean, I think that there is a lot of effort to preserve the past within subsequent generations. There is a lot from all parts of all three countries, in fact.
Yeah. Bangladesh, I think, often gets removed from my perception of partition because it was not the uh, uppercase P partition, but it was, you know, insanely chaotic in its own sense. And
Hmm.
uh, yeah, I don't know, man. I feel the cynic in me is very quick to judge all people, um, including myself.
Hmm.
You know, it's so easy to turn people against one another. I think this is again going back to, because I keep drawing these Nazi parallels. They there was, I think, Goebbels tha ya kaun tha. He said it's very easy to tell people what to do. You tell them that this party who is different is the enemy, and anybody who doesn't agree with this is a traitor. And but now everyone's on your side, and which they did to great effect. And ठीक है वो Nazis थे, वो बुरे थे. We see this every day in our lives by people who are not such movie villains, um, and it's really telling about humans, that taking a step back and seeing, does this make sense, this thing that I'm being asked to believe. It's very hard to ask people to do this or expect them to do this, um, but you are, I feel, even though you have said that you are a cold person, I feel I feel that you are not. Perhaps, you know, you might feel that way about yourself. Lekin,
I think it's
because you
in
are,
my personal life, not in the work that I do. I can't afford
huh,
to be that cold in the work I do.
exactly. Um, I wonder if these two things are related. But khair, the question that I was going to ask was that because you are clearly uh, inviting all this sensory, you know, perception from people, like the weight of their stories, the way they're saying it, the way the visual presents itself to you, um, has this, how do you find yourself dealing with the weight of this history?
Everyone asks that question.
Yeah, it's an obvious, because like these stories are so heavy, and
But the
you're
thing is,
not,
if you're in the middle of recording 3, 4, 5 stories a week, and you know that time is not on your side, people are dying. You know, COVID especially exacerbated that for many people. A lot of people who were in the 80s and 90s passed away in the last 2 years. So you know, like time is not on your side. You have to do this work now. So if you are recording actively, you may not even think about what it's doing to you.
hmm,
It is only when you stop, or maybe like in my case, when I heard stories of enormous violence, that I couldn't stop thinking about it.
yeah,
And I know many people, they record their interviews and they transcribe after many months when they've had a bit of distance from it. Unfortunately, that's not what I was doing. So
by choice. Yeah, just that's just the way
by
you are.
choice, by time, like I don't know. And I really needed to, after a while, pause for a couple of months. And because it does impact you. When you do like dream about it, it's the voices that stay with me.
Mm.
I remember how people said things. I remember what they said. I remember when they laughed, when they cried. I remember when they, took out a book and showed me a map. I remember it.
There was a
And
lady
that,
who spoke Potwari, and she, as you were leaving, she grabbed your hand to say something to you, and her son wanted the conversation to end, obviously because he was concerned about his mother. But yeah, that's like,
I don't think
and
it's
also
because he
again,
didn't
you're,
feel concerned. I think it was because it was a history of when she was abducted and he didn't want her to talk
huh?
about it. Yeah.
Okay,
He was afraid of what she would say.
acha, not concerned as much, perhaps
I'm
only.
sure that was concerning as well, like how it would impact her when she said it, but what would she say?
Hmm.
Which is another example of men speaking for women, because every time in the conversation she would try to say something or I would try to ask her, she would look towards him to say, "Can I answer the question?" Ultimately, when she did hold my hand, yes, it was to tell me that a letter had come many years
Yeah,
after she had been
yeah.
returned to India by the authorities, and that letter had her name on it. And just seeing her name on a letter, it could have been a bill, could have been an electricity bill for all she knew, but
And
just
she
seeing
never
her,
opened it?
she never opened it. She just, I think she tore it up and threw it away because the fear was, what if my abductor had sent me this?
Yeah, and he
What
still
if
knows
he
where I
found
am.
out where I am? Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, what was our initial? I'm like,
How does
yeah,
Anshul keep
right.
herself?
Right.
Okay,
No, no,
yes.
no. Because see, this is the thing. Like, you think about the ways people tell you. Like now, I'm thinking about how she grabbed my hand and where we were sitting, and it really draws you in.
Hmm.
You know. And what I have found is that now I just need to distance myself from this subject for a while,
Hmm.
at least engaging with it in this kind of these real stories. I need a break. I
Yeah,
can't actively think about partition after constantly talking and thinking about it every day for the past decade, because that's how long it will be next year.
yeah, yeah.
I think, just feel like a really heavy person. It is very heavy. It's very
Huh.
hard to hold on to people's sadness and vulnerabilities and do justice to it and constantly think about it and draw connections to several people across several territories, across several decades, and
Your family.
my family, but then make sense on platforms like this where you have to draw from different sources constantly, and you have to constantly keep all the stories at the back of your mind.
Yeah,
Um, but I know that there is also there is a real joy in doing this work.
yeah.
It is a huge privilege to be on the receiving end. Like I feel enormously privileged to have recorded stories of Indians, but also Pakistanis and Bangladeshis who speak to me regardless of the border that is between us, and strive to literally find what unites us rather than what divides us. Or if that something divides us, then talk it through.
Yeah, yeah,
And I find that very uplifting. Like that for me is the hope for the future. One on one conversation,
yeah,
reconciliation, or whatever reconciliation would look like, it has to be hinged on one
yeah.
relationships.
And it must be said that it's so, we've talked about, your the heavier stuff a lot, and that is often what is spoken about a lot. I suppose because people also could say gravitate more towards, like, the darker sides of stories. But you have several, like, sections with stories upon stories of friendship, hope, reconciliation, all of that happening in the book as well. Um, which also must have, if the bad stuff has a negative impact, the good stuff would most definitely have some sort of positive impact on you, does
It's
it?
yes, on me, yes, and I hope on other people also. The thing is that you need stories like this to change some of the misconceptions
Hmm.
about who the other is and
Yeah,
what the other is, and the construction of the other that has taken decades to form. So I'm not saying that someone will read something and automatically think the other way about an Indian or a
of
Pakistani,
course.
but it may help them to think, oh wait, this person is saying the same thing that my mother says.
Hmm.
Or I think a lot of times a very mundane example would be that Indians love Pakistani dramas, love them,
Yeah.
love them.
Yeah.
And in so many cases, I've heard things like, oh, in that drama on Zara, they spoke Saraiki that my grandparents spoke, and I never heard in India. And it was only through that drama that I understood that dialect. Or my mother was watching a Pakistani drama where they use the same phrase that my nanny used to use. And then she started thinking about, if they still use that phrase and we still use that phrase, then surely there must be other things that, are common between us. Like it's very mundane things like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Which वही वाली बात है ना कि the just like official history doesn't record normal people, then official perhaps ideas of reconciliation don't think that such small things can connect you. How committed I know you're very busy. How committed are you to the idea of doing follow-up episodes?
I am very committed to that, and I will make time. Don't find.
Okay. So how about
This has
you?
become a very long episode now already.
And there's still so much more. Okay. So whenever you know your schedule in the coming weeks, let me know. And उस हिसाब से मैं पढ़ लूँगा. Like I'll make that deadline. Okay, I have to get through this. Yeah. Okay. There's a few other things that I texted you about that I think we'll keep, because I think those questions will sort of change as I read more and as we talk again. How's this been? This thing we've done so
It's
far?
like how we speak. Like जैसे हमारी बातचीत होती रहती है.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope I haven't क्या कहते हैं, put more formal pressure on your mind.
कुछ तो था.
हाँ.
नहीं था है ना. कुछ तो definitely था. Lekin I think that these questions are very important to ask. They may be uncomfortable.
Sure.
लेकिन मैंने भी तो लोगों से यही सभी पूछा था.
Yeah, I talked about Nazis way more than I expected. So much.
I was also a bit taken aback by that, but
Yeah.
that's really okay. That's completely okay.
Hopefully.
In fact, I would like to recommend a book from that time.
Okay.
A very rare book called The Third Reich of Dreams,
Okay.
where a young woman goes around recording people's dreams at the time, and the dreams that have people say that the Nazi regime has infiltrated their dreams, and she
Right.
goes around and records those dreams and writes a book about it.
Wow, that's crazy. Like at the time of the Nazi regime.
Yes.
Acha. Huh. Okay. Are you? Chalo, we're done with this episode. Where do you want people to find you on your Instagram? The book will be linked in the description. Send me some. मुझे कोई भेज देना, because there's one place.
Oh, sorry. मैं cover उतार के पढ़ती हूँ.
I have it here. This is the book. It might be reversed on the thing. I'd remove the cover as well. But is this? Hopefully, I will reverse it back.
No,
You will link it.
Perfect. Great.
Yeah.
I read a lot of my notes. I'm a huge note maker, taker. I write in my books a lot. So.
Yeah. I was thinking of doing this, but I was like, नहीं ऐसा नहीं करना चाहिए.
नहीं जरूर करो यार, मैं तो बहुत करती हूँ.
Okay. Do you want people to find you on your Instagram?
You can absolutely find me on my Instagram. You can also find my email on my website, which is readily available if you'd like to share a story or something.
ठीक है. That's all in the description, and sooner, hopefully than later, we'll do a follow-up or follow-ups to this. All right. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming, Aanchal.
You.
Bye, everybody.